That participation online is allowed in accordance with the modalities established by the Rules Committee. The agenda today includes the hearing of the Charge d'Affaires of the Embassy of Australia to Italy, Alison Burrows, as part of the fact-finding investigation on issues related to the presence of Italy and of other European countries in the Indo-Pacific area. On behalf of the committee members, I would like to thank Dr. Burrows for her participation in our work. She's accompanied by Dr. Tracy Reed, Deputy Chief of Mission, Dr. Angus Minns, Second Secretary, and Dr. Teresa Pelosi, Research Officer. In view of the little time available for the hearing, I immediately give the floor to Dr. Burrows for her presentation. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and highly esteemed members of the committee, I have the pleasure of being here today before you on behalf of Australia. Please allow me to start by praising this committee for the important work it is carrying out and and I'm here in Rome at the center of Italy's democracy, and the aspects related to the Indo-Pacific area may seem to be very far off. However, the establishment of this committee, which is a standing committee on the Indo-Pacific area by the present members in this room, represents a recognition of the fact that the events in this important region are not subject to boundaries and have an impact at the global level and impact Italy and Europe. What I would like to emphasize here with you today is that peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific area and the Euro-Atlantic area are intertwined. And indeed, the leaders, thinkers, and Italian analysts are well aware of this. And there is an increasing, there are risks for the interactions with the Indo-Pacific area. It is important to point out that there is a growing awareness of this in the Italian Parliament, and I do hope that what I will be saying today may help you to give your contribution to the key decisions that Italy must face as events evolve in this region. I would like to take a few minutes to acknowledge the important contribution that the Italian government is already giving to the Indo-Pacific area. Suffice it to consider the Italian presidency of the G7 to be aware of this. President Meloni has put on the table the challenges in Africa and in the Mediterranean area, while at the same time making a commitment to continue the work of G7 with regard to the Indo-Pacific area. There is an awareness that the challenges that the Mediterranean countries are up against, and also many of the African countries, are common and similar to those of the Indo-Pacific countries. Suffice it to mention the press release of the G7 summit in June, where the leaders re-emphasized their commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific region under the rule of law, and that may be inclusive, prosperous, and safe. Now, the link between peace and security in the Indo-Pacific area and security at the global level was welcomed favorably by Australia. From a strategic standpoint, Italy, in that region, Italy is establishing increasing relationships in the defense area. Mrs. Meloni announced the Cavour deployment and the strike group carrier in the Pacific area, together with the F-35s and the Air Force for the pitch black drills in the area. So we look forward to the activities of the Amerigo Vespucci for exercises and drills that will be deployed in October. This is an additional positive action which demonstrates that Italy is committed to giving its contribution in that region. Now, all this leads me to express why I'm here today. Namely, I'm here to share the prospects and the thoughts of Australia with regard to the challenges and also the opportunities, of course, that the Indo-Pacific area will be facing in the upcoming years. At the end of last year, the Prime Minister Albanese delivered a speech in an institute stating how Australia sees its role in the Indo-Pacific area. Our Prime Minister said that the role that we can play in our region, where prosperity is led by shared opportunities and by stability, must always be ensured by collective responsibility. This is the contribution that Australia can give as a medium power in the Indo-Pacific area, and that is protect the region under the rule of law, where each country, both large and small countries, are free to pursue their activities and their fate and ensure their future. A region where the sovereignty of each nation is respected and the dignity of each individual is upheld, and where each and every one of us contributes to the peace and stability of the region, because we acknowledge that a safer world, a more secure world, goes to the advantage of all. Now, these words define very clearly what is Australia's vision of our region. We are exercising our free will, and we are contributing with our efforts to ensuring a balance of powers in our region in such a way that no country should dominate over others and no country is dominated. It is likewise important to recognize, to acknowledge that the Indo-Pacific area is highly diversified, and it extends from the eastern coasts of Africa and across the Indian Ocean through to Australia and Southeast Asia up to Northeastern Asia and the insular states of the Pacific Ocean. Australia is willing to involve all the parties in the region, all the stakeholders, and first of all, we will be strengthening our relationships with the other countries of the Pacific area so as to be a reliable partner that they may interact with. And Australia, as a member of the Pacific Alliance Forum, believes in the sovereignty and solidarity of the Pacific. The ties amongst the first peoples of our lands and seas are the peoples of the Blue Pacific that date back to many centuries. For Australia, the Pacific is our family. We share an ocean and we share the future. We are the custodians of the vast blue Pacific continent, and we pursue the same objective, even though we may be different in several respects. Australia is open and is respectful of this area, and it pursues the Pacific Way. We believe that the Pacific should be a master of its security without any coercion and in accordance with the Pacific Way. Australia attributes great importance, it attaches great importance to the cooperation with the other Southeast Asian partners and with ASEAN in particular. In March 2024, Australia hosted the second special summit called Asian Australia, or ASEAN Australia, which is the core of the Global Strategic Partnership. The presence of the leaders of Asia in Australia was the opportunity for emphasizing Australia's commitment to contribute with ASEAN in order to ensure respect of the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, equality, and independence. With ASEAN at the center, relationships with Africa also important in pursuing these objectives and to promote the confidence and transparency amongst the countries of the Indo-Pacific area. Our attention, however, is not limited to the Pacific side of the Indo-Pacific. The same challenges that are unprecedented and that are present in the Pacific Ocean are present also in the Indian Ocean. We know to what extent the Indian Ocean is important for the global economy. It hosts more than 1/3 of the world traffic of commodities, of bulk commodities, and 2/3 of global transport of oil. And for this reason, Australia hosted the Conference on the Indian Ocean in February 2024. The conference was the opportunity for discussing any positive and practical ways of ensuring that the Indian Ocean is stable and prosperous and may thrive in the light of shared rules which can enable all countries to carry out trade and to thrive. Therefore, with these partners, we must be aware of the powers that play a central role in the region. Australia has adopted a careful approach to stabilize its relationships with China. A stable and constructive relationship between Australia and China is in the interest of both countries. We are experiencing benefits from this commitment. There is trade, there are commercial or freer commercial exchanges, and some consular issues have been solved in this way. Our approach will always be patient, it will be well-balanced and deliberate. We cooperate where we can, and we discuss issues where we're not in agreement, and we pursue our national interest.
Our relations with China should not be defined by our differences. We recognize the mutual advantages stemming from our commitment. Australia and China have agreed to resume a dialogue and to continue cooperating in practical terms, also on issues such as trade and the economy, on climate change and energy, and the creation of bonds between our peoples. We also agree that we can foster bilateral relations and support our mutual national interests if we manage our differences with wisdom. When needed, we will continue to raise our voice regarding matters of interest for Australia, including the detention of Australian citizens and human rights. Furthermore, we will continue to speak out in support of international security and the global rules which underpin our prosperity and safety. This carefully considered and well-calibrated political approach was at the very center of Li Chang's visit in June. This was the first visit of a Chinese prime minister to Australia since 2017. Australia and China have agreed to renew a dialogue and to promote a closer cooperation on trade and matters of pertaining to the economy, on climate change, and culture. As I mentioned, Australia is committed to involving its partners to deal with the various regional challenges. The truth is that the geostrategic context in the Indo-Pacific area is becoming increasingly dangerous and unstable. I'd like to say a few words regarding Australia's view on a number of topics which are a matter of concern regarding this part of the world. We are facing the most challenging strategic context since the end of World War II. The region has witnessed the largest military development since the end of World War II, with very little transparency and reassurance regarding the strategic intentions in the region. We are increasingly seeing players such as Russia and China, both of whom are ready to act to reach their goals by exerting pressure and force more than rules. Were a conflict to take place in the Indo-Pacific region, this would be a catastrophe for our peoples and for our prosperity. The South China Sea is a crucial area for the entire international community. We want to make sure that the South China Sea is peaceful, an area in which international law is complied with, and navigation is open to trade. Australia is deeply concerned by the claims of certain countries or whenever they participate in actions which don't comply with international law, or when their actions are destabilizing or are a provocation, or when they do not respect with the freedom and rights of others. And we are especially concerned by these claims supported by intimidation and coercion. Another matter of concern for Australia is linked to North Korea's actions, which are against Australia's interests, since Australia hopes for an open, stable, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region. Their constant search for weapons of mass destruction and their distribution systems are a serious challenge to the international community's non-proliferation efforts. Even North Korea's cyber activities are a serious threat to our economy, to our national security, and they jeopardize our struggle towards a safe and stable cyber environment. Australia firmly condemns North Korea's constant work to achieve weapons of mass destruction and their constant launching of ballistic missiles. We urge North Korea to be fully compliant with the UN Security Council's resolutions, which impose upon it to abandon their nuclear program and their programs to achieve other weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missiles in a full and irreversible way. We also urge North Korea to change and to commit in a long-standing way to participate in dialogues with the U.S. and with the Republic of Korea. Permanent peace and stability in the Korean Peninsula can be achieved only through dialogue. And in this context, Australia has a fairly sound region when it comes to the region we wish to live in, and when it comes to our national interest. After having pondered some of the challenges the Indo-Pacific region have to face, I also have to mention some opportunities and elements which allow us to be more optimistic. Despite the fact that the concerns for the region are very real, Australia and its friends and partners are striving to find new and innovative ways to cooperate. Australian partnerships are essential when it comes to promoting the strategic balance of the region. The Quad is a key example. It is a group made up by Australia, India, Japan, and the United States, countries which share a common vision for an open, stable, and prosperous Indo-Pacific region governed by mutually accepted rules in which everybody can trade and prosper. By working through the Quad, we can coordinate our efforts in a more effective way. We can take advantage of our strengths, and we can share and pool our resources as a way of dealing with the priorities set out by the countries of the region. And together we can obtain more than we would were we to go it alone. I mentioned the Quad, but there are a number of other examples. Australia and several other countries in the region are currently negotiating the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, the IPEF, which brings together some of the largest regional economies and some of more dynamic ones at that, so that we can face contemporary economic challenges. This is a way to strengthen regional supply chains. It is a way of expanding trade and green investments as a way of supporting the transition to zero emissions and to foster efforts to counter corruption in the region. IPEF members have announced a number of major results obtained in less than 10 months of negotiations. As I mentioned at the beginning of my remarks, events in the Indo-Pacific region spread beyond our borders, and they have repercussions throughout the world. They can be perceived intensely even here in Europe. And similarly, events in this part of the globe have clear implications in the Indo-Pacific region. The most obvious example is the illegal and immoral invasion of Ukraine by Russia. In this case, Russia has violated the fundamental principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity, the same principles that we are trying to defend so strongly in Australia's region. It is essential for Australia and Italy to recognize the connection between the issues which take place in both of our regions. Peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region and the Euro-Atlantic region are closely interlinked. Be they the maritime routes in the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, which support our trade, and which support the complex global supply chain, which are at the very heart of the manufacturing industry, or be it the underwater cables, which underpin the digital economy, We are always connected. And these connections, these links, depend upon our common support of resilience and a rules-based system. We ask our European partners to underscore the fact that a large-scale conflict in the Indo-Pacific region would have devastating economic consequences on the global level, along with the humanitarian catastrophe that would lead to. Furthermore, we wish to cooperate with our partners as a way of supporting the rules we have complied with, and to ask our friends to continue to foster their resilience. That is why in the Indo-Pacific region, we listen carefully to our neighbors. We focus on the respect for regional institutions, and we work to offer choices to build resilience, which is so crucial when it comes to discouraging coercive measures. And from this point of view, Australia will continue to strongly support Ukraine. We are working closely with our partners, including Italy, to help Ukraine to end the war based on its conditions and to continue to put pressure on Russia. We welcome the attention paid by Italy's government and parliament towards this important region, both through the national government and through the EU and the G7. And once again, allow me to express my most sincere gratitude, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and members of the committee. It was an honor and a privilege to join you today, and I will be happy to continue with our discussion. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for having taken the floor in Italian. Thank you for the very high quality of your remarks, and I'm sure that we have learned a great deal today, and I'm sure that your remarks will be the focus of our upcoming research and discussions. The Pacific Way, the Blue Pacific continent, you said us so much more compared to the things that we have discussed within this commission so far. Thank you for a very rational and cautious approach. Thank you for having warned Italy and the entire world. Thank you for mentioning the fact that the Indo-Pacific region is essential for the free world and for our democracies. Let me open the floor for any questions at this point. Madam Gruppioni. Well, good afternoon. I want to thank you for your remarks. Thank you for contributing to our discussion. Congratulations for having spoken in Italian today. Good afternoon. Again, I wanted to congratulate you for your remarks in Italian. Thank you for sharing so much food for thought with us today. I have two questions for you. The first is on trade. I'd like to have some insight regarding the strategies you are implementing to diversify your trade partners in the Indo-Pacific region and to reduce your economic dependence from China. Secondly, what do you think the impact of the war in Israel will be for the Indo-Pacific region? And what is your stance regarding the conflict? Thank you. Thank you very much. Are there any requests, any other questions? Mr. Bealey, followed by Mr. Carre. I also wish to thank Ms. Burrows and the Australian Embassy for making themselves available today. As you yourself mentioned, I want to express our admiration for your country's very patient and rational approach. I also wish to underscore the friendship between Italy and Australia. This is a friendship and a closeness which has no geographical origin, since you are thousands of kilometers away from us, although we are very close culturally, as far as our societies are concerned, as far as our mutual history is concerned, and also as far as our economies and our geopolitical stance in this day and age. I have a couple of questions for you, if I may. First of all, regarding the procurement of raw materials, which is so important for us, especially here in Europe, since China has a very strong policy, especially when it comes to Africa, a continent which has a number of precious raw materials and rare earths. Your continent can help us, and I'm sure that in the future we will have to increase our cooperation, also as a way of freeing ourselves from China's leadership when it comes to raw materials. So I'd like to ask you to give us some insight regarding Australia's approach on this topic. Secondly, switching to an entirely different topic, topics that I'm especially interested in, I'd like to ask you something regarding denominations of origin, denominations of protected origin, something that was discussed at length in the free trade agreement between Australia and the EU, which did not result in a positive outcome, probably also due to the fact that denominations of origin are based on more flexible rules in your country, whereas we tend to be stricter in the EU. And as far as Italy is concerned, this is an especially important topic since denominations of origin are a way of defending our more typical products. So can you give us an update on this topic? Is there an ongoing discussion in Australia, and what are the possible outcomes in the future regarding the free trade agreement with a specific focus on denominations of origin? And another very quick question for you. The Foreign Affairs Committee is focusing very much on the so-called Cold War between Australia and China regarding its influence in the Pacific Islands. So can you tell us something about your agreements between the various Pacific Island states, including Tonga, Tuvalu, and can you say something regarding the agreements signed by China and China's financial aid to other islands, including Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands? And can you tell us something about the financial support, sent by China? This was covered by the press in Italy as well. But a number of think tanks in the sector seem to indicate that Chinese influence in the Indo-Pacific island states is declining, whereas Australia's influence seems to be on the rise, as is the United States. So I'd like to ask you for your point of view regarding this specific topic. Thank you very much once again, and all the best.
I would like to invite you to be more concise in asking your questions. Mr. Carre. Madam Burrows, I would like to thank you for having come here. And since I was born in Italy, but I lived in Australia for 40 years, and my children and grandchildren are Australian. So I would like to thank you for having spoken in Italian, a very correct Italian, much better than mine. But I wanted to ask a couple of things very quickly. You were very clear with regard to the economy, the aspects into security and transport in the Chinese Sea, and given the relationships that Australia has with all the Asian countries, but above all with China. I have just returned from China, and I've just returned, and I spoke to the Prime Minister, and you have resumed a direct dialogue, which was waning somewhat. So from this standpoint, I would like to congratulate Australia on this, with regard to this. And with regard to defense and security, you have drawn up a plan based on deterrence, military deterrence with an economic and geopolitical plan of the region, but based basically on defense and security. I'm also a member of the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, as like other colleagues of mine who are here today. So I wanted to ask two things. First of all, in case or if there were to be a conflict, or if it were necessary to take a given stance with respect to China, well, what would Australia's position be with regard to Taiwan, for instance? Because we know that the Chinese government has clearly expressed the idea that it will be taking action with regard to Taiwan. And secondly, what do you think about the joint drills that we will be doing, Italy and Australia, the pitch black drills? And what do you think about this deterrence strategy that we are proposing for Indochina, and where Italy is or has set up strong relationships with Australia? And as my colleague quite rightly said, there are many Italians in Australia. I think they are 8% of the Australian population. But there are many Australians also who love our countries. As I said, I've lived there for many years, and my children live there. I have a very special liking for Australia, so if we could also strengthen our relationships also with regard to the teaching of Italian, that would be great. Thank you, Ms. Honori. Thank you to the Australian embassy, delegation that is here. I appreciated the reference you made to the a stable and prosperous Indo-Pacific region, but also the fact of creating good virtual conditions. Taking advantage of your presence here, and with regard to the activities of this committee, with regard to another fact-finding investigation that concerns the supply of rare materials and the geopolitical consequences that this has, well, I wanted to recall these two events. Last month, Australia prevented several Chinese investors to increase their shares in Australian industries with regard to rare earth, let's say. And last year, Canberra blocked the acquisition of a lithium mine by a Chinese consortium. So the idea is the supply of critical materials and rare earth. And do you consider the escalation of a trade war and a cooling of the relationships with these regions? So is this escalation underway, or is there room for imagining that there might be trade relations as they are now, and that they may continue in the future amongst all the partners involved? And is enough being done from this standpoint? So the supply of critical materials is this, if this is sufficiently dealt with. Thank you also for having brought together the issues, the topics being dealt with by the two fact-finding groups. The questions are quite a lot, but I wanted to go back to the future of the security architecture in the Indo-Pacific region. You mentioned the Quad, but I might also add the defense agreement between Australia and Japan and other agreements like AUKUS. So what is going to happen in the Indo-Pacific area? Some think tanks and analysts have said that there's going to be a new NATO. A new NATO will be set up for the Indo-Pacific region. And what is Australia's position on this? With regard to the defense of values and human rights, Australia has always supported the human rights. And in fact, the core business of this of the game that is underway is based on human rights. It is a good idea for the Indo-Pacific area to be free and open and so on, but there are issues with human rights. And so what can you expect with regard to an alliance based on democracy that is based not only on security but also on political positions?
Those most interesting questions. I will try and take them one by one if that's okay. I'm going to start off with the question about diversification and trade diversification. So Australia has a trade policy in which we are always meeting the next challenge. We have our core of our trade policy is in the World Trade Organization. We have a number of regional groups in which we talk about trade and negotiate on trade, and by I mean APEC and I mean IPEF, that Indo-Pacific Economic Framework that I spoke to. We also have many free trade agreements on a bilateral basis or a regional basis. So we are always negotiating and really, even if one avenue closes down, if one partner is not working well with us, well, we negotiate another way. It is diversification is one of our core aims on trade. In terms of the impact of war, Israel. Yeah, Israel. Sorry, on the Pacific. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you asked about. The Indo-Pacific and Israel. I don't have a very clear answer to you. I will just say that the same sorts of values and respect of international norms that we talk about, and human rights indeed, that we talk about and think about when we talk about the Indo-Pacific, we also apply to the Gaza conflict. We are very concerned about what's going on. The actual impacts on it on the Indo-Pacific are not direct, but we have to look at how we are dealing with that conflict and making sure that our efforts in terms of human rights, in terms of conflict, are universal ones and not directed at any particular partner. So that's what I'll say on that one. Okay, on critical minerals. At this point, I have to confess that until October, when the negotiations fell over, I was the chief negotiator for the free trade agreement between Australia and the EU. So I possibly know more about this than you would want to hear, but I will do my best. So, but I also should say I'm now the former chief negotiator for the Australian side. Look, critical minerals have been a super important part of the free trade agreement negotiations, and the EU was absolutely insistent on that. They made it very clear that they wanted outcomes on critical minerals in the free trade agreement. However, as you know, the free trade agreement did not conclude in October. We have agreed that we're on a pause. We haven't stopped, but we're on a pause. There will not be the sorts of outcomes that we had negotiated in the free trade agreement without that agreement. However, we already had a critical minerals partnership with the EU, with Brussels, and there's been a recently signed memorandum of understanding, so we are continuing to work with Brussels on that. But there was also part of the question was about like the broader world stage. What about what's going on with Chinese mining in Africa, for example? And that's something that we follow very closely along with the rest of the international community in terms of our concerns about environmental issues, about security issues, indeed about human rights. So Australia is not as directly involved and engaged in Africa as Italy is, and that's a question of geographical distance for us, but we are very much interested in watching what is going on with Africa, particularly in that space. The other thing I would say is that Australia really does have a lot of rare earths in the main. They're still in the ground in the middle of the desert. If Italy would like to invest more in Australia, your investment would be very welcome. That's half a joke, but there is a need for greater investment in the Australian infrastructure there. Okay, PDOs, which I spent years of my life on, and your comment that they're treated flexibly in Australia but not in Italy. By the very end of the negotiations in October, when the negotiations collapsed, we had come to an agreement with the EU on PDOs. I can only say that it was an agreement that both sides were satisfied with, but you should know that the EU side fought tooth and nail to protect Italy's interests on PDOs. So it actually wasn't the thing that disrupted the end of those negotiations. That was more about, it was really, on our side, we felt that the EU was asking too much of us on a number of issues and not offering us enough market access. But I won't go into the details, just to say it wasn't actually PDOs at the very end. The EU and we had come to a very effective compromise. Okay. The question about China and Australia in the Pacific. Now, this is something that the Australian government watches extremely closely. You alluded to the number of agreements that we have set up with Pacific Island countries, like the Whalapile Union with Tuvalu. Australia is still the #1 partner of choice in economic, security and development relations for the countries of the Pacific Islands. The Australian government has taken that relationship extremely seriously. In recent years, it's been an absolute priority of the Albanese government, and you will see that Australian ministers led by Foreign Minister Wong are in the Pacific all the time. We have a minister for the Pacific. We are just there talking to them, but also listening very carefully to them, because there is a at times, Australia might have talked too much and listened too little to the small Pacific Island countries. We are changing our approach and making sure that what we are doing meets their needs better. I think you made a comment that China's influence is declining and Australia and the US influence is on the rise. I can't say that as clearly and neatly as that, but I can say that in terms of increasing our influence in the Pacific, that is absolutely our objective, and Australia is dedicating enormous resources towards that. Okay. Okay, all right. What would we do if there was conflict in the South China Sea, and particularly on Taiwan? So look, that is a big question. With your association with Australia, you would know that Australian politicians, the Australian public, the Australian defence community spends much of its time worrying about those flashpoints in the South China Sea and the potential of problems in the Taiwan Strait. I guess the main point that I want to make is that there hasn't been any change to our One China policy, and we regard peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait is in everyone's interests. This is something where we work very carefully with all our regional partners. we work with them in the ways that we must, because everyone wants to avoid some sort of conflagration in the Taiwan Straits. What do I think about the joint drills like Exercise Pitch Black? I think it's a wonderful example of collaboration between Australia and Italy. It's a very welcome recognition about how Italy is spending more time in the Indo-Pacific. You have a committee. You're sending ships to exercise and aircraft carriers to Exercise Pitch Black. It is just what that sort of engagement is just what we want to see from our European friends. It's very, very welcome. Teaching of Italian, well, I couldn't agree more. You will probably have worked out that I'm not an Italian by descent, particularly because of my name. I studied Italian in Australia. That's how I first learnt Italian, so I could not agree more. I wish there were more resources dedicated to it, but you have my wholehearted support on that. Okay, raw earths and rare materials. So, look, that's a really great question, because there are so many things you're balancing there, which is the sensitivity about critical minerals and rare materials, how necessary they are, how ubiquitous they are, but actually how important they've become in a security context. On the specific questions about investment proposals from Chinese entities, we look at all investment proposals through the same lens and through the same process. There is not a separate process for China. We have what's called a negative test for investment. That means that although we examine our investments, we start from the point of view that we will pass them unless that there's a problem. So we examine every case on investment proposals. And I read that in the year to June last year, more than 90% of commercial investment proposals from China were approved. So we are approving many, many cases, but we do at the same time take a strong interest in security and in our supply chains, and the applicants for those investment proposals will know exactly why their specific proposals will be turned down, and quite frankly I don't, so I might leave that there. A trade war with China, well, that's the last thing we want. Australia suffered very greatly with the trade impediments that characterise our trade relationship with China over the last few years, and I have a terrific stat here, thank you Angus, which is that out of the products that were affected by the Chinese impediments, in 2022 we exported 253 million's worth of products like coal and cotton and copper and timber to China, and then the following year it was 11.5 billion, so like 253 million, that's all we got through in 2022, but by 2023 it was 11.5 billion, so you can see that there was really something at work there. The Australian government has worked extremely closely to remove those trade bans, and I know I will now repeat it in English because you'll hear it everywhere in Australia, which is just our approach will remain patient, calibrated and deliberate. We cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and engage in our national interests. There were a few years ago where China put some demands to Australia. We did not agree to those demands. We kept going, we kept talking to them, we kept this same policy, and yet we are seeing those trade impediments being removed, which is excellent. In terms of your own questions in your Presidente about the framework, so you mentioned a few of them. We have, a bit like our free trade agreement, we have many security agreements. The bedrock of our regional architecture since the Second World War has been our alliance with the United States and with New Zealand, more recently particularly with the United States, but you've seen us reach out to all sorts of regional partners through the Quad, AUKUS bringing in the United Kingdom again. There are bilateral comprehensive strategic partnerships. again, where we see a problem, where we have friction, we try to negotiate a new partnership. We are quite open to who our partners will be, as long as they share our interests, meet our national interests and share our core values. So I can't say what the future framework will look like, but my friends in the security sphere in Australia are always reassessing, like, are these the right groupings for us? We watch NATO very, very closely and, of course, have observer status there. Our collaboration with NATO is very close, and we talk all the time about what that means for the Indo-Pacific. We've cooperated with NATO on many missions, so I think there are also some opportunities for Italy and Australia to pursue as well. But first of all, I'm very, very glad that Italy is participating in our security exercise Pitch Black, which is coming up. It's a very welcome thing. Yep.
Grazie davvero. Dichiaro
Thank you very much, and that brings an end to our hearing. We've finally made it. Thank you very much, Angus, for all of your support and for interacting with us. Thank you for helping us organize this meeting. Thank you very much once again for joining us today.